The night was humid, the kind of sticky southern night where the air feels heavier than your own thoughts. And the streets of Raleigh, North Carolina were nearly empty. A young black woman stepped out of her black SUV after pulling into a gas station. She was dressed casually, gray hoodie, black joggers, no makeup, hair pulled back, but her eyes carried a weight, the kind that only comes from years of service. What no one at that gas station knew, not even the cops who would soon humiliate themselves, was that this quiet woman was Captain Nyla Carter, one of the most decorated female operators to ever serve in Delta Force, America's most secretive and elite special operations unit. But instead of being recognized as a war hero, that night she was treated like a criminal. 2 police officers pulled up behind her, lights flashing, their tones sharp before they even approached. They said she looked suspicious and fit the description of someone they were looking for. Nyla tried to stay calm, tried to remember the lessons of de-escalation she'd taught young soldiers overseas. She explained she was just buying gas, that she lived 15 minutes away, that she had served her country for 15 years. But the officers didn't care. One of them, Officer Reynolds, smirked when she handed him her military ID. Delta Force? What's that supposed to mean? Lady, you think wearing camo makes you special? Out here, you follow the law like everybody else. His partner, Officer Doyle, chuckled. Yeah, especially your kind. Always think the rules don't apply. And before Nyla could even process those words, Reynolds shoved her against the hood of her SUV, twisted her arm behind her back, and kicked her legs apart with brutal force. She bit her tongue, tasting blood, refusing to scream, refusing to give them the satisfaction. But deep inside, her soldier's instincts flared. She could have dropped both men in seconds, disabled them before they even blinked. But as she fought back, the headlines would not read, "War Hero Defends Herself." They would read, "Angry Black Woman Attacks Police." So she endured the humiliation, the kicks, the cuffs, the slurs whispered under breath. But what those cops didn't know was that their actions that night would not end at a gas station. They had just set in motion a courtroom battle that would expose their lies, shake the department, and leave their careers and reputations in ruins. And when Nyla Carter finally walked into that courtroom, standing tall in her dress blues, rows of medals glittering under the fluorescent lights, the same men who once kicked her would not be smirking anymore, because the truth always has a way of coming out. But the road to that truth was long, bloody, and full of shocking twists. Nyla was booked like a common criminal. Mugshot, fingerprints, the works. Her charges? Resisting arrest, obstruction, assaulting an officer, all fabricated. And the paperwork had inconsistencies that should have raised alarms immediately. Timestamps didn't match, body cam footage had malfunctions, and supposed suspect description Nyla allegedly fit didn't even match her build, height, or clothing. But when you're black in the South, inconsistencies often get swept under the rug. She spent the night in a holding cell, silent, replaying every second. She'd led missions in Afghanistan where every wrong decision could cost dozens of lives, but nothing had prepared her for the cold sting of being treated like she was less than human in her own country. The next morning, she was allowed one phone call. She didn't call a friend. She didn't call her parents. She called Major General Harris, her former commanding officer in Delta. And that's when the game changed. Because unlike most people who would have quietly begged for bail and moved on, Harris knew Nyla's record. He knew the kind of soldier she was. And he also knew what it looked like when corrupt cops tried to cover their tracks. By sundown, Nyla had one of the most ruthless civil rights attorneys in North Carolina sitting across from her in the detention center. And that's when the real fight began. The DA thought it would be an easy case. 2 police officers claiming a combative suspect resisted arrest. After all, who would the jury believe, the police or a young black woman? But they didn't account for Nyla's discipline. She had kept every receipt from the gas station. She had GPS logs from her SUV. She had her military ID timestamped by the officer's own body cam before it mysteriously shut off. And most importantly, she had witnesses. 2 college students had filmed part of the arrest from across the street. The shaky phone footage showed Reynolds kicking Nyla's legs out, Doyle laughing, and Nyla not fighting back at all. The cops thought they could intimidate her into pleading guilty. Instead, they had just walked into a legal ambush. But here's where the twist hit. The prosecution doubled down. Instead of backing off, they tried to paint Nyla as dangerous, even suggesting her military training made her more of a threat. They said, "This woman has combat skills." If officers felt threatened, that alone justifies their response. That argument was about to backfire in ways they could never imagine. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the benches. Activists rallied outside. Everyone wanted to see if a black woman could win against two decorated officers in a state where cops almost never lost cases. When Nyla entered in her uniform, silence fell. The medals on her chest told a story the DA didn't want the jury to hear. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. She had bled for this country. She had saved lives overseas. And now, she was being told she was a criminal on her own soil. The prosecutor sneered, calling her volatile and potentially violent. But Nyla's lawyer rose slowly, locking eyes with the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client is not on trial for being violent. She is on trial for being black." Gasps echoed. The judge banged the gavel. But the damage was done. The truth was out. And then came the moment no one expected. Nyla herself took the stand. Calm, steady, her voice unwavering. She told the jury what it felt like to serve 15 years overseas, only to come home and be kicked, cuffed, and humiliated by men sworn to protect her. But just as the defense seemed to be gaining ground, the prosecution revealed a bombshell piece of evidence that threatened to destroy everything. Something so shocking that even Nyla's lawyer froze for a moment. The courtroom air turned cold when the prosecutor slid a USB drive across the table. He plugged it into the evidence screen, smirking as though he had just cornered the defense. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice dripping with false confidence, "the defense wants you to believe this woman is calm, disciplined, and incapable of resisting. But what you're about to see will change your mind." The lights dimmed, the screen lit up, and there it was, body cam footage the police had claimed was corrupted. The jury leaned forward. Nyla's attorney stiffened. Nyla herself sat stone still, her hands folded on her lap. At first, the footage seemed to support the officers. Reynolds shouting commands, Doyle claiming she was reaching for something, both moving aggressively as if in fear. The sound was scratchy, almost too convenient. Then came the key moment. Reynolds' boots slamming against Nyla's legs as he yelled, "Stop resisting." The courtroom murmured. The prosecution looked smug. But then something strange happened. On the footage, Reynolds' body cam tilted, and for a split second, the angle caught Doyle's face. He wasn't scared. He wasn't tense. He was smirking. Smirking as if he knew the camera wouldn't survive the night. The footage cut out abruptly. The prosecutor snapped his laptop shut with a flourish. There you have it. Evidence that the officers feared for their safety. Fear justifies force. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded, others frowned. Nyla's attorney rose slowly. "Your Honor, the defense requests access to the raw data of that footage. We have reason to believe it was edited." The judge hesitated. The prosecutor objected, but the request was granted. A forensic digital expert was called in, and when the raw data was examined, the courtroom gasped. The footage had multiple cuts, spliced together to create a false narrative. Metadata showed it was tampered with after the arrest, from a police department computer. The jury no longer shifted uncomfortably. They stared wide-eyed at the officers sitting stiff in their seats. The prosecutor's smirk was gone, but just when it seemed like the defense had won this round, another twist emerged. The prosecution produced an eyewitness of their own, a man named Alan McBride. He claimed he'd been at the gas station and saw Nyla shouting, acting erratic, and trying to lunge at the officers. His words were damaging. His testimony was vivid, but there was one glaring problem. Alan McBride was not some random bystander. He was a cousin of Officer Reynolds, and the defense was about to prove it. Nyla's attorney approached the witness stand like a predator circling prey. "Mr. McBride, you say you just happened to be at that gas station?" "Yes," McBride stammered. "And you just happened to witness everything?" "Yes." The attorney paced. "Tell me, sir, how long have you known Officer Reynolds?" McBride blinked. I don't know him personally. The defense attorney paused for dramatic effect. Then he held up a stack of papers. Interesting, because phone records show you exchange over 30 text messages with him in the past week. And this, he tossed another paper onto the stand, is your Facebook profile where you list him as your cousin. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers. Even the judge looked rattled. McBride's face went pale. He stuttered. The prosecutor tried to object, but the damage was done. His credibility was shredded. The defense attorney leaned in close, his voice a dagger. So, Mr. McBride, were you at that gas station by gas, or were you there to help your cousin cover his tracks? McBride couldn't answer. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order, but order was gone. The jury's eyes burned holes through the prosecution. The tide was turning. Yet in the midst of this collapse, something darker loomed, because what no one in that courtroom knew yet, not even Nyla, was that this wasn't just a case of racist cops abusing their power. It was bigger. Evidence was about to surface showing that Reynolds and Doyle had been part of a pattern, a network of officers with multiple false arrests against black citizens, all buried under manipulated body cam footage, falsified reports, and coerced witnesses. And Nyla's case was about to blow that wide open. That night, back in her apartment, Nyla sat alone. She hadn't spoken much throughout the trial. Her attorney was the one fighting, the one arguing, the one dismantling lies piece by piece. But inside, Nyla felt the same burn she felt overseas, the one that came right before a firefight. She thought about the irony. She had survived IED blasts, ambushes, insurgents with rifles trained on her head. Yet here at home, her biggest battle wasn't against enemies in uniform halfway across the world. It was against men who wore the same uniform she had sworn to respect. She opened her closet. Inside, hanging neatly, was her dress blues. The metals caught the faint glow of her lamp. She ran her fingers over them slowly, feeling the weight of every mission, every sacrifice. She whispered under her breath, "I didn't fight for this country to be broken by it." The next morning, she walked into court not just as a defendant, but as a soldier prepared for war. And just as the defense prepared to reveal evidence of a wider cover-up, the prosecution made a desperate move, one that stunned the courtroom. They requested a sealed hearing. And when the doors closed, what came out in that hearing left even Nyla speechless. Because hidden within police archives was a file labeled only Operation Iron Fist. And her name was in it. The sealed courtroom doors closed with a heavy echo, cutting out the murmurs of the crowd outside. The judge leaned forward, his face drawn, his voice unusually tense. Both counsels, what you're about to hear is not public record. This involves an ongoing federal investigation. Anything disclosed in the sealed session stays within these walls until otherwise instructed. The prosecutor rose, sliding a thick manila folder onto the bench. Its cover bore 2 words stamped in faded red ink: Operation Iron Fist. Nyla's attorney frowned. What does this have to do with my client? The prosecutor adjusted his tie. Everything. The judge motioned for him to continue. Operation Iron Fist, the prosecutor said, pacing slowly, was an internal initiative within the Raleigh Police Department designed to identify and neutralize what they deemed high-risk civilians. Individuals who, based on training, background, or perceived influence, could pose a threat if they ever resisted police authority. The words cut like knives. The prosecutor opened the folder, pulling out a printed document. Captain Nyla Carter was flagged in the system 3 years ago. Her file marked her as high risk due to combat training and potential militant influence. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Objection. That is profiling of the highest order. Are you saying this decorated soldier was targeted because she was too capable of defending herself? The judge held up his hand. Sit down, counselor. I want to hear this. The prosecutor smirked. Captain Carter wasn't arrested that night by accident. She was already on a list of people officers were told to treat with maximum caution, and if necessary, neutralize through aggressive force. Nyla's breath caught in her chest. She had spent her career operating in shadow wars overseas, only to come home and discover she had been placed on a different kind of battlefield, Her attorney leaned forward. Who created this operation? The prosecutor hesitated. That is still under investigation. But Nyla knew the look in his eyes. He was hiding something. That night, after the hearing adjourned, Nyla sat in her car outside the courthouse, hands gripping the wheel, her mind spinning. High-risk civilian, neutralized through force. It was profiling on steroids. A systematic blueprint to crush people like her. Black veterans, community leaders, anyone who dared to stand taller than the stereotypes society wanted for them. But what shook her even more was how deep the rot must go. This wasn't just two racist cops. This was a machine. Her phone buzzed. A known number. She almost ignored it, but instinct told her otherwise. She answered. A low male voice spoke. Captain Carter. You don't know me, but I served with you. Kandahar, 2011. Her grip tightened. Kandahar was a graveyard of memories. The voice continued. My name's Mason. I'm out now, working security, and I know about Iron Fist. It's bigger than Raleigh. You need to be careful. They're not just trying to discredit you. They're trying to erase you. The line went dead. Nyla sat frozen, staring at the black screen of her phone. Erase her. Not just humiliate her. Not just convict her, but erase her. The next day, the defense came armed with a new weapon, a whistleblower, a former records clerk, terrified but trembling with courage, took the stand under subpoena. Her name was Emily Vega. She testified that she had been ordered to clean files for the department, shredding or altering anything that showed patterns of misconduct. Her voice cracked as she spoke. When I saw Captain Carter's file, I knew it wasn't right. She hadn't done anything wrong. But her name was there, marked red, just like dozens of others, mostly black men and women, many of them veterans. The courtroom went silent. The prosecutor tried to dismiss her as a disgruntled ex-employee. But then Nyla's attorney dropped the hammer. Email records, direct orders from supervisors telling Vega to adjust timestamps, overwrite data, and make it align with officer statements. The jury's eyes widened. The judge's gavel pounded for silence, and Nyla sat in her chair, still as stone, knowing the storm was only beginning. As the trial stretched into its third week, public pressure exploded. News outlets covered the story nonstop. Protesters marched outside the courthouse with signs that read, "Justice for Nyla" and "Stop Operation Iron Fist." But the backlash also brought danger. Nyla began receiving anonymous threats. Notes slipped under her door. Cars idling outside her apartment. Even her attorney's office was broken into. Files ransacked, though nothing was stolen. It was intimidation. Classic psyops. And Nyla recognized it instantly. She'd seen insurgents use the same tactics overseas. Break the enemy before the battle even begins. But she wasn't the kind of soldier who broke. Still, the prosecution had one final card to play, and it was their most dangerous yet. They revealed footage from a classified training exercise Nyla had led during her Delta years. Where they got it, no one knew. But on the screen, the jury saw Nyla disarming multiple men in seconds, snapping weapons out of hands, slamming opponents to the ground with terrifying precision. The prosecutor's voice boomed. This is who the officers were facing that night. A woman trained to kill. Is it unreasonable to believe they fear for their lives? The jury looked shaken. The room was tense. And for the first time, Nyla felt the trial slipping away. Because yes, she was trained. Yes, she was dangerous when provoked. And yes, she could have ended those officers in seconds. But she hadn't. The question was, could the jury see that truth, or would fear blind them? The morning of the final hearing, the courthouse felt like a battlefield. Barricades lined the streets. News vans swarmed. Protesters chanted Nyla's name, while counter-protesters waved thin blue line flags. The entire city seemed split in two, one half demanding accountability, the other defending the badge no matter the crime. Inside, Nyla sat at the defense table, back straight, medals gleaming. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. This wasn't just her trial anymore. It was a reckoning. Her attorney rose. "Your Honor, The defense is prepared to present evidence proving that officers Reynolds and Doyle were not only guilty of abusing Captain Carter, but were part of a broader scheme, Operation Iron Fist, that systematically targeted black veterans and community leaders. The judge leaned forward. Proceed. The first witness was Emily Vega again, but this time she came armed with more than testimony. She carried a flash drive, shaking as she handed it to the bailiff. On the screen, files opened one by one, spreadsheets, emails, internal memos. Each document showed names, dates, arrest records. Each name belonged to a person of color, each arrest suspicious. And at the bottom of every record was the same signature, Lieutenant Commander Mark Doyle. The jury gasped. Doyle's face went pale. Reynolds clenched his fists. But that was just the beginning. Nyla's attorney then played the anonymous video, the one showing another black veteran being brutalized while Reynolds and Doyle watched. The defense attorney's voice was thunder. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not coincidence. This is not an isolated incident. This is a machine designed to intimidate, to silence, to destroy. And Captain Carter? She was simply the wrong soldier to target. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. But no gavel could quiet the truth anymore. The prosecution scrambled, trying to claw back control. Objection, Your Honor. These videos are unverified. Their source anonymous. The defense attorney cut him off, then explained why the officers present in this footage are the same men sitting in this courtroom. The jury stared at Reynolds and Doyle, whose silence spoke louder than any denial. Finally, the judge ordered both officers to stand, and under cross-examination, cracks turned into fractures. Officer Reynolds, the defense attorney began, why did you write in your report that Captain Carter was combative when multiple witnesses and video evidence show otherwise? Reynolds squirmed. Because that's what I perceived. Or because that's what you were instructed to write. No, The attorney slammed a printed email onto the stand. Then why does this email from your supervisor, Lieutenant Doyle, instruct you to maintain consistency with Operation Iron Fist protocols? Explain that. The jury gasped again. Reynolds froze, sweat dripping down his temple. He glanced at Doyle, but Doyle stared straight ahead, jaw locked, as though refusing to sync with the ship. Answer the question, the defense barked. Reynolds stammered. I was just following orders. Those 5 words detonated in the courtroom. When it was her turn on the stand, Nyla rose slowly. She stood tall in her uniform, ribbons catching the fluorescent light. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. She looked at the jury, her voice low but unshakable. I have led missions in Afghanistan. I have rescued hostages. I have carried soldiers off battlefields who never got to come home. And yet, on American soil, I was treated as less than human. Not because of what I did, but because of what I look like. These officers say they feared me. But fear is no excuse for injustice. Fear is no excuse for corruption. Fear is no excuse for destroying lives. And if this can happen to me, someone with medals, records, and a uniform, imagine what happens to those who have none of that protection. Her words pierced the silence like bullets. Even the judge seemed shaken. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman's voice trembled as he read the decision. We, the jury, find Officer Reynolds and Officer Doyle guilty on all counts. The courtroom exploded. Cheers, tears, shouts of justice for Nyla. The judge banged his gavel for silence. Order, order. But inside, Nyla felt no joy, no victory, just a hollow ache. Because while those 2 men would face prison, she knew the machine behind them still existed. Operation Iron Fist hadn't been destroyed, only exposed. Weeks later, federal investigators stormed the Raleigh Police Department, seizing hard drives and shredders. Lawsuits piled up. Dozens of cases tied to Operation Iron Fist were overturned. Nyla's name was cleared, her charges expunged. But her life would never be the same. She received invitations to speak at universities, military bases, even Congress. Her story became a rallying cry. But behind the applause, she wrestled with the same truth. Justice was fragile, conditional, and always contested. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, she opened her old footlocker. Inside lay her worn combat boots, dusty from Afghanistan sand. She placed them beside her courtroom heels, staring at them both. Two battlegrounds, two wars. And in that moment, she realized her fight wasn't over. It had only changed terrain. Months later, a package arrived at Nyla's door. No return address. Inside was a single USB drive. She plugged it in. A folder opened. Hundreds of names. Hundreds of files. All marked under Operation Iron Fist. At the very bottom was a final note. You took down 2 soldiers, but the generals are still out there. Do you want to keep fighting? Nyla leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. Her war wasn't over. It had only just begun. True courage is not just fighting enemies abroad, but standing against injustice at home, even when the battlefield is your own backyard. Subscribe for more interesting and powerful stories.